Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second day of the 8th Annual Barrett Literary Festival. Thank you for joining us. My name is George Cochrane, and over the next hour, we are in conversation with Simon Garfield about his latest book, Dog's Best Friend, A Brief History of an Unbreakable Bond. This event is being brought to you in association with Barrett Animal Rescue Kennels, a charity which provides refuge for and seeks to rehome unwanted pets. And you can find full details of the work they do on their website, and we thank them for their support. Now, before we start, a few housekeeping rules. Your cameras and microphones are switched off during the event. So if you want to ask Simon a question, and I hope you will, then I urge you to do so via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens about here. Questions can be submitted at any time during the course of the conversation and need not necessarily relate to this book. Simon is very happy to talk about any of his works. We will then be setting aside 10 or 15 minutes at the end of the hour to answer these. So, to our guest, Simon Garfield is the author of 20 books of nonfiction, including the bestsellers Just My Type, a book about fonts, On the Map, Why the World Looks the Way It Does, and Mauve, How One Man Invented a Colour That Changed the World. Alongside these commercial successes, Simon has also enjoyed a great deal of critical success, most notably for his book, The End of Innocence, Britain in the Time of AIDS, which won the prestigious Somerset Maugham Award and which is to be republished later this year with a new foreword by Russell T. Davies. Perhaps we might talk about that later. For now, though, I would like to welcome Simon and just begin by asking him to tell us a little about his own history with dogs. Have you always had dogs, Simon?
Hi, George. I just want to say I'll answer whatever you want. I just wanted to say at the beginning, it's very nice to be here, and thanks very much to the Barrett Lit Fest for inviting me. One thing that I always feel when I'm writing a book is anticipation of doing a live event and talking about it and doing PowerPoints or whatever it is, and turning up with my dog in this case. And it's just been such a shame that obviously we've been unable to do that. But this is, this is a good substitute. So yeah, I've had dogs all my life, pretty much. I've got a picture here of my very first dog, who was called Gus. That's with my mum. So I will broaden. Here we go. Now, a Basset Hound, not the sharpest tool in the box, I would say. And I was about, I think about 6 when he came to live with us. I think he was about 1 at the time. And I adored him, certainly more than my dad adored him. So when it sort of, he became, I think, like a lot of pets who enter a house where there's kind of one person who really wants him. When that one person, i.e. me, slightly, well, he sort of, when I didn't have the time or school came into the picture or girls or whatever it was, he got fewer walks and less attention. And so he spent the sort of last 3 or 4 years of his life in Ruislip, which was nice countrified existence for him. Then I had a dog when my kids were young. So my kids did that thing that I did. We must get a dog, must get a dog. Of course, delighted. He was a yellow Labrador called Chewy. He died of cancer when he was 10. And the dog who features in the book quite a lot is called Ludo. And this is gorgeous black lab Ludo here. So that's when he was a pup. And find a pic, and this is him. Here we go. This is him in his pomp, looking very beautiful in the garden. Now, unfortunately, he died about just as the paperback was going to press, so I could write a nice little tribute about him. He was, so that was like, he died in mid-July, and he was almost 14. And like a lot of black labs, he suffered from hip dysplasia. And his back legs just went. And so we would be out sort of walking at any point on the heath, or going for a sort of late night a wee around the block, and he just couldn't move, and it was kind of awful thing to see, and he was clearly upset by it. And then he had other ailments like old dogs do, so we decided that it was time, and it was a sort of a great loss. But almost 14 for a lab, any big dog is a good life, and so he is sort of much missed, and I sort of miss him. I know dog owners watching this, or people who've lost dogs, will know that they become such a part of your life that you don't quite understand how you can exist without him, B, how you existed before. And it's odd things, really. So obviously it's the walking and the companionship and all of that, but then there were kind of spatial things you don't realize. So he used to sleep at the foot of our bed, and every time I got out of bed, I would obviously be very careful, especially if it was sort of early and he was still sleeping or whatever. Towards the end, I was be very careful to sort of walk over his basket, and I still sort of do that. It's an extraordinary thing. You're just so used to those things, and also just the presence in the kitchen. Labradors love food, so the whole thing about you open the fridge door and he will come from a different postcode if he hears the fridge being opened, and so it's those kind of things. You think, well, why don't I hear someone coming down the stairs?
You do sort of write a lot about him in the book, and you did acknowledge that he was quite an old dog, even when you were writing the book. Did writing the book sort of help you prepare for his death in any way? You write about the different ways in which cultures kind of memorialize and celebrate their dogs. Did that sort of study help you?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the sort of cruelties of pet ownership is that it's highly likely that your pet will die before you, and it's that kind of inbuilt. I mean, I think I've heard some people say I'm not going to get a dog, and I'm sure this applies for cats as well, because I couldn't bear the grief of losing him or her, and that's sort of something I absolutely do understand. So, but having said which, I've lost 2 other dogs, and as you say, I kind of wrote quite a lot about it. I mean, the things that hit home, I think, about which I write about in the book a bit, about the impact of losing a dog, is that like I said, you don't quite know what you've lost till they've gone. But also, and what they give you through your life, but also the fact that the dog has been such an extraordinary companion for us for so long. So there's a nice bit where I go to a dog cemetery in Hyde Park. So I don't know if people watching this will know Hyde Park at all, but there's a bit where it comes out onto the Bayswater Road, and hidden behind a lodge is a Victorian dog cemetery, and the graves, hundreds of graves there, and the gravestones are about this big. I think I said it's sort of the size of a menu in an old-fashioned Italian trattoria, and it's sort of like this, really. And they are tributes of the sort that we would right now. It's just sort of, what a loss, what an extraordinary dog, what a companion, all those things. The names have changed. There's a one which I write about where there's a dog called Scum, and then there's a lot of other kind of names that we don't hear so much anymore. The classic ones like Rex and Fido and Prince, I suppose, are quite common. So it's that got home to me, really. First of all, that this has been going on for a long time, you know, and people have been mourning their dogs forever. But also, you know, as I said, the emotions don't change. I mean, you sort of see that if you read any history book, you know, you read Hilary Mantel, you kind of think emotions are the same through history. The names change, the circumstance changes. But I think our love for a dog is you know, going back to the caves really is sort of pretty much unchanging.
Was it this kind of close personal connection with dogs that made you want to write the book in the first place?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, half the books I've written, I've come up with the ideas, and then the other half, editors have come up with ideas. Often the books that sell most are the ones where the editors come up with the ideas because they know the market. In this case, it was my editor, and she said, I mean, we had a chat about possible things that I was going to, write about next. So I suppose this is, 3 or 4 years ago now, and she knew that I always loved dogs, and obviously I had Ludo then, and so she said, "How about it?" And my fear was there have been so many books really written about dogs that I kind of thought, well, what can I bring? And as you said, there's a kind of personal element which I think is very, important in this. If I was going to write about it, I was clearly going to write about my own experience of going around. But then I thought, okay, well, I can enjoy this. I can have a lot of fun with it. I can sort of bring in a lot of things. There's so many dog books that are out there are either very, very personal memoirs, Nicky Campbell has written a really nice book about how his dog he says, saved his life, because he was suffering from a depression, and the dog kind of really helped him. We know how common that was. And there are other kind of memoirs, personal memoirs. Monty Don has written about Nigel, his lab. And I kind of thought, well, maybe if I can combine that a little bit with what I really like to do is to take a big subject, which is the history of humans and dogs, and just try and sort of ease out the really good tales, the things that I'm really interested in about our relationship through history, and then sort of look at dogs in literature and, dogs in culture in general, and then combine it with my background, which is journalistic. So I was going to go around to crafts and discover dogs and talk to dog trainers and, that kind of thing. So it's a very general book. Hopefully and I also wanted, the other key thing really, which I talked about with my editor, is I wanted to keep it a very positive thing. So it was written pre-COVID. Some people think, it's like a COVID dog, and it really isn't, because it was commissioned a long time before then, and actually it was all completed before COVID began. But thank goodness, in a way, because I kind of thought, well, if a book is going to come out at this time, I wanted it to be a very positive thing. And the nice thing about doing a grand sweep is that it was very much up to me to choose what I was going to include and what I wasn't. It wasn't like a definitive history of anything, which is, I guess, one reason why I've never written a biography of someone, because I've never actually been that interested in the uninteresting bits of someone's life. So many biographers will tell you their subject obviously only really gets interesting, after school, when they actually become interesting as people and the reason to write about them at all. But obviously, if you're doing a biography, you have to include everything. And I kind of knew the sort of books that I like to do, well, I can actually pick and choose. So that was a delight. And I was very, very keen not to talk about, I don't know, I think there was a lot of cruelty around hunting. I was quite keen not to mention that. I didn't want to talk about dog fighting, that kind of thing. I didn't really want to talk about dog cruelty, but I talk about it a little bit in terms of dog breeding, and obviously the great growth in that, and a lot of bad practices. Again, because obviously COVID increased demands for dogs so much, so I touch upon that. But I guess I wanted to celebrate, the love of dogs, and tell some good tales along the way.
Yeah, well, you call it a brief history, but the history of dogs is anything but brief, really. And just reading your other books and looking through your bibliography, I wonder if this is kind of the longest span of history you've had to sort of encounter, and was that daunting?
Yeah, I mean, it's an odd one, really. I mean, a lot of the books that I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. I've never been asked that before, and I haven't really given it that much thought. So, in a way, we now know that, although we don't have an exact, date at all, but we think that, the dog-human bond, as we understand it, began, I don't know, 20,000 years ago or so. So in that sense, it does go all the way back, as you say, and it is a kind of very long history. But actually, the domestic dog arrangement, the one where dogs lived inside our homes, really only goes back to Victorian times. I mean, that's when dogs came in from the yard. There are obviously lots of examples, which will sort of go against that timeline. But that's the big push of dogs coming into our homes. So in one sense, it only goes back to Victorian times, and a lot of books I've done, I don't know, books about maps and stuff and typefaces go, much further than that. But yeah, no, it's kind of, I think hopefully people picking up the book will realize that this is a sort of a history with a lot of personal kind of choice involved in it.
But you definitely do have some pretty sort of complex, certainly complex for me, science about, the anatomy of dogs as compared with wolves, for instance, and their sort of genetic development. A lot of the research that you cite, anyway, is very recent, actually. And I was just wondering if you were consciously looking for the most recent thing, or whether there has been a lot of breakthrough, in dog science in the past few years.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, not so much the past few years, but certainly the past 40 or 50 years is when all the really big dog research began. I mean, before then there was a huge amount of theories. I mean, Darwin had his own theories. He was extremely interested in kind of, sort of dog development and dog behavior, and behaviorists existed before then, and obviously in fiction there was lots of interpretation of how dogs behave. In terms of the good science, if you like, we're looking pretty much from the 60s onwards. So a lot of experiments at Bar Harbor into controlled experiments, I suppose, into dog behavior. I think one reason for that was, if you talk to people involved in research, they felt that when they put in for, this is a general point, obviously, but I think a true one, when they put in for funding, they found that it was less forthcoming if they wanted to research what was seen as pets, essentially. They the more exotic, the rarer the animal, the more it was considered proper to kind of research. So there was then a switch around, I suppose, the 60s and 70s. And obviously recently, with I talk in the book a little bit about the, our ability to track the first full dog genome, the genomic pattern. I think in 2006, I'll correct myself later on that. And that was a sort of an extraordinary thing. And that's obviously, the genetic research from there is kind of really, is a really significant breakthrough. I mean, especially if we talk about the dog-human bond, we obviously have a lot of diseases that we share with dogs. And so the interest now in that and the funding that's come in on that has been immense. But you're right. I mean, it's not obviously always true that the best science is the most recent science, but it is true that we absolutely understand dogs, you know, a lot more now. I mean, I can give you some examples if you like, which viewers may find interesting. I'm going to have to refer to some notes on my screen only because I just want to get things right, and I don't want to be too vague about things. I mean, one thing obviously that we have known about before is a kind of healing influence of dogs. I mean, you could say that goes all the way back to our very first relationships, that the emotional connection was a healing one. You know, we first valued dogs for all sorts of reasons. One, they helped us with hunting, but they kept us warm, and they also then kept us, you know, we kept them as companions, and so they provided an emotional bond from there. But that existed very clearly, sort of, I think Charles Dickens went round, it was an East London hospital in the, I think, 1840s, 1850s perhaps, and he saw a dog on a bed. A dog was called Poodles, wasn't a poodle, and the dog just cheered the patients up, and the dog sort of hopped on a bed, much as dog, you know, therapy works now in hospitals. It's very hard to go into a hospital now where there isn't a therapy dog, and the same in schools and universities as well, I think. And so we kind of, you know, that realization of, I don't want to quite call it a scientific, you know, value of dogs, but definitely a kind of one where they made us more relaxed, and they cheered us up. And I go around in the book to an oncology ward in a local hospital with a border collie called Bryn, and I kind of thought, a border collie is way too jumpy and way too excitable to actually provide any form of calming therapy. But I was wrong. You know, absolutely, patient said, going in on a Wednesday for my chemo or whatever it was is bearable because of Bryn. So that's you know, that's me going. So I'm just going through just to sort of find some nice examples here of so you know, I mentioned Darwin before, and he's obviously not known really for his, you know, his work with dogs, and a lot of it is anecdotal and very personal. But one nice thing that he wrote about was something called a hothouse face that he saw one of his dogs have. So he basically he was going on a walk, the dog thought, and the dog would come with him, and then he actually veered off into his hothouse to look at his seedlings, and the dog just looked so disappointed he wasn't going for a walk. And this was, you know, this was valid behavioral sort of science, and he had the dog changed his countenance, and so that's kind of interesting, I think. He also looked into whether dogs had a sense of humor, and his son noticed that he talked to dogs in a different way, which is something we now call pet-directed speech. And he talked to dogs in a way that we talk to children. That's a kind of really common thing. So there's a theme running through the book, really, is you know, do we treat dogs too much like humans, i.e. kids? So here's a nice one. This is, again, the sort of dog therapy thing, but an example of a more sort of empirical form of science, I suppose. In 2017, not far from where you are now in Scotland, there was well, actually a fair way away, Dunbartonshire, but still nearer you than me, I think. There was 38 dogs were involved in an 11-day experiment in 2017, organised by some researchers at the University of Glasgow, into how dogs responded to music and what types of music. So there had been work done earlier on classical music, and dogs, their heartbeat reduced, or there was a lot more gaps between their heartbeats, so they seemed to relax, they lay down more if they listened to Mozart. But these researchers wanted to know what sort of music dogs calmed to most, whether it was reggae or rock or Motown. It found Motown, in fact, was the one where they got most excited, because obviously it's kind of dance music. I mean, it's sort of the results as you expect, but what they loved was soft rock, so Genesis. So if you play, I mean, who plays Genesis, and Phil Collins now anyway, he asks. But if you do, your dog is going to respond in a calmer way, according to these guys. I do say, you know, there were other questions, such as, had the academic grant committee been a tad over generous this time? But so anyway, I could go on. There's lots of experiments in the book. There's one more which actually is very interesting. Which so I talked about you know, the first the first full dog genome being kind of tracked, and this was actually, I think, the end of 2005. One thing that researchers are looking at, it's obviously when you've got the sequence in dogs, they also have it in wolves. So we know obviously that the domestic dog developed over thousands of years from the grey wolf. And you then think, okay, well, is that just us sort of treating a dog better and developing over time, or are there other things? And there obviously are other things going on, but one of the things is the hunting instinct, and that's one of the genetic markers, I suppose, that researchers at the moment are looking at. So they're doing research. So the genome, the Tasha, the boxer, it was a place called the Broad Institute, which is in Boston. And one of the researchers, there's just a nice quote here talking about the research they're doing. She says, this is from a woman called Eleanor Carlson, who I talked to, and we went over there. She says, the example I use is retrieving a ball. Retrieving is actually a variation on the wolf hunting sequence. The pattern for wolves taking down large prey has a few elements. They see it, they lower their head, and they chase it, and then they do what is called a grab bite, nip at the heels, take it down, and then they go for the jugular. What she was interested in, and is interested in now, is what in our domestication over many centuries removed the bite to the jugular element. Why do dogs in the main retrieve, and why do they give the ball back, and why do they just not hang on to it as prey? Obviously some dogs are trained in that way, but she says it's not as simple as that, you know, because there are lots of purebred retrievers who don't retrieve as well. So, you know, so anyway, that's sort of the sort of like a taster of some of the really interesting science going on now that I kind of, you know, talk about in the book.
Thank you, that's fascinating. Yeah, my Labrador certainly doesn't give the ball back. You talk about going to an ecology ward, for instance, and in fact you seem to visit a lot of places during the book, whether it's crafts or the cinema. Is that one of the appeals of your job, or certainly the research? Do you have to get out of the writing room?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I like to do, the ideal book for me is that perfect combination of library research, so, you know, Shoulders of Giants and all of that, and that's kind of very important, and that's how I learn, and that's sort of my excitement, and hopefully I can transmit some of that, and maybe, you know, because obviously what I write is popular history, is translate some of the, you know, incredible academic research that's been done. And then the other bit is just my sort of journalistic background. You know, so I began as a journalist, and it's well, this is another kind of, you know, bit of proof that the book was definitely pre-COVID, as I was able to get out there, and that's what I really like. So it was great talking to the woman who's doing that genomic research now, and you know, going to I've never been to Craft, so I'd seen it like so many people on TV and on Channel 4 now and stuff, and I loved all the, you know, the crazy kind of you know, sort of the events and the flyball and all those kind of things. And actually, I was more interested in the, you know, in the dog training element than just the best of show bit. But I went to that, and you realise that actually the best of show and anything that goes in, you know, actually takes place in a ring, it's like 10% of actually what happens at Crufts, and 90% of it is kind of merchandise, pretty much. So they're trying to sell, well, supposedly for the dog, but obviously for the owner, a huge amount of crap, really, and most of which you probably don't need. You know, once you've got your dog lead and your bed and your dog food, you probably don't need you know, the sort of memory foam dog bed and all the other toys and all the other, you know, sort of recipes now, vegan recipes and stuff for dogs. I'm not sure. I mean, probably very good for the environment. I'm not sure how good some of those are for dogs, but they anyway, they'll sell you anything there. Discovered Dogs, which I went to, a whole different thing. That's far more hands-on thing. So if you're thinking about buying a dog, and I think, I mean, the one that I went to, although there were more all over, was the Excel Centre that was then turned into a big COVID, you know, hospital, and wasn't really used, thank God. But this is when you know, people were when we were all really panicking, so yeah, so it's great. And I talked to trainer. A really fun thing, a fun, you know, day out was just spending a day with the trainer called Susan Close, who is very sort of, makes Barbara Woodhouse look like the most sort of lackadaisical dog trainer you'll ever see, really. She was firm, and she loved dogs, didn't like owners very much, I discovered, and thought that the owners were, you know, 90% of the problem. If you've got a problem dog, is the owner, not the dog. And she really didn't like it when dogs came to her with kind of bows in their hair and that kind of thing. So anyway, so all those kind of things that you know, that I would find, I don't know who it was who said sort of 90% of the work is kind of showing up, but that's sort of true. You know, you have to get, in my case, because I'm not what you would call a pure academic historian, I always feel I have to get out there. And also, it's just nice meeting these people.
Yeah, as you say, a lot of those accoutrements are as much for us as for the dog, and yeah, that's one of the big strands in the book, isn't it? How we are increasingly treating our dogs as humans, whether it's, you know, giving them more human names, whether it's, you know, dressing them up for Instagram. I wonder though, to what extent the opposite is true as well, whether, you know, we are becoming more like our dogs in a way. And I only asked because you make this great observation about how so much of our language is very canine. We often describe ourselves as, you know, puppyish or dog tired or hand dog. Yeah, I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, one way of answering that is basically how dogs, if you have a dog, how it changes you as a person. So I mentioned the sort of the pedomorphism element, you know, becoming like a child. And there's no doubt that the responsibility that one has as an owner is a little bit like the responsibility one has as a parent. You know, they are kind of, when they're young, and this is pretty much dogs through their life, they are helpless. They are, I mean, we've made them helpless. Is at one point, I think, you know, these aren't dogs in the wild, these are domesticated dogs. But obviously the environment of where most dogs live in urban areas, you know, it's a slightly scary place for all sorts of reasons. You know, we sort of have to protect dogs from whatever it is, cars or people who would want to take a dog from who is tied up outside the supermarket. And we obviously want to protect their health. So we do all of that. So I think dogs absolutely become part of our lives in a way that they never intended. And you know, that's true on a general level. It's also obviously true on a day-to-day level. They dictate our day. You know, it's sort of, if we don't get up in time, they will not be able to go out for a wee. They want ball walking. They need feeding. We can't leave them alone all day. We have to come back. So all those elements, you know, let's say we really dominate our day and also dictate our spending power. I think, you know, it's only when you get a dog, you think, well, dogs are expensive. Dogs have gone up, you know, hugely over the last 2 years in terms of initial cost. But then the cost after that, if you don't know, is immense in terms of, well, just basic stuff, in terms of food, and obviously in terms of, you know, medical care and all sorts of other things as well. That's even if you don't spend £200 on a bed, you know, for a dog. So kind of all those elements are definitely true. And we have, I think, you know, again, through sort of Victorian times, been able to kind of, we have definitely become more like our dogs. I mean, I begin, you know, in the book talking about, well, who's in charge, you know, who's, you know, another word that you say, dog word, who's top dog. And there were two sort of reasons, and you asked before about how the book came about and stuff, but there were two kind of things that made me think, okay, this is really an interesting point we've come to now in our relationship, in our timeline. One is that there is a dog cafe near me, which serves a much longer dog menu than it does a human menu. So I just thought, when I heard about this place, I thought, oh, it's like a dog-friendly cafe, and there's loads of those, like a dog-friendly pub or whatever. But actually, no, it's a cafe for dogs, really. You go along, you have your coffee or, you know, sandwich, but actually they have a far more elaborate menu. And I thought, okay, so that's interesting. That's near Hampstead Heath, where I live. And the other one, which is South London, there's, I don't know if it's open, if it's reopened now, or what the story is, you know, in the last 6 months or so, but there's a place in Balham, South London, where you can take your dog to the cinema. Well, it's a cinema where you take your dog, and they initially began by showing kind of dog-related films. So that would be Isle of Dogs or Lady and the Tramp or whatever it is. And then it was just all films, basically. And you just take your dog, and the dog goes free, and it sits next to you in a blanket. And you get special kind of pooch treats, popcorn, I'm afraid. And they keep the lights a little bit higher. So I thought, you know, so the dog doesn't get frightened, but the dog gets bored, I can tell you, very, very, very fast. Unless he or she is terribly sleepy, in which case makes no difference, the movies. And so anyway, kind of interesting. I thought, right, so where exactly are we going with this? The really interesting thing, which the dog trainer that I mentioned earlier said, is that if you really want to understand how your dog is feeling, you know, if you sort of want to be like your dog, what you do is you put a camera on their collar, one of these little, it doesn't have to be like a big expensive GoPro thing, it can be anything really, any of those tiny little things, and you see what they come across, and you see how scary it can be in terms of, you know, even if it's just feet coming towards you, or bigger dogs coming towards you, let alone traffic or bin men or whatever it is. So that's kind of sort of interesting. So we're sort of able to become more like our dogs now, and we certainly spy on our dogs more and understand them. I suppose it's one of the less intrusive good things about CCTV is that when we're away, we can we can check up on our dogs and making sure they're not going through the bin again, or they're not unwell, or whatever it is, and we can do more experiments about, do they really wait at the window for us to come home? And in our case, we caught Ludo several times on the sofa when we were kind of out. So we were out at the cinema or whatever, and then we checked on our phone, and he was absolutely, because it wasn't allowed on the sofa, and he was absolutely snug on the sofa, being a human in a way, as he saw, but obviously it was also the most comfortable spot in the room. He didn't want his 200-pound dog bed. He wanted our sofa, because it cost £1,000. And so he was on that. And then, of course, he hears the key in the door, and you can still watch him on the phone, and he slinks off like the guiltiest thing, as a sort of Shakespearean ghost slinking off. And it's extraordinary. And we obviously implant this idea of this emotion of guilt. I'm not sure he has guilt. I think what he has is cleverness, and just saying, okay, I'm just going to try and get off here without making too much noise, and they will never know. But not quite clever enough to know, A, we've watched him, and B, there's a very warm patch and slightly sort of hairy patch on the sofa. He hasn't quite worked out the kind of Hoover element yet. But anyway.
That's a very familiar sight, I have to say. We've kind of danced around COVID a little bit, and the pandemic's often been likened to World War II, and the worst crisis since Second World War. Yet the way we treat dogs now and the way we treated dogs then is very different, you say in the book. And it's one of the most extraordinary and shocking facts in the book was that, on the advice of the government, an estimated 400,000 dogs and cats were killed in London alone during the first few days of the Second World War.
Yeah.
How was that even possible?
I know. I mean, it's extraordinary. We pride ourselves as sort of a nation of dog lovers, and we're supposed to be more crazy about dogs than anyone. Although you go to America and you realise that really isn't the case at all. But you can't come across a fact like this, and you have to read it 3 or 4 times. This isn't original research that I've done. Obviously, but there was a fantastic book written just about how we treated our dogs during the war, and it is absolutely extraordinary. And so the government never issued a kind of edict saying you've got to kill your dog or cat, but the general advice was, and from I think the RSPCA and those all those type of organizations as well, was that we are going to have trouble feeding ourselves. We sort of have to put ourselves first. This is World War II 101, but the men are going to go away. The women are going to go into occupations that they've never done before to fill up those spots, and no one will be able to look after your dog, and we're not going to have any meat, and everything's going to be rationed anyway. So be kind to yourself, be kind to your dog, help us win the war, put your dog down. And that's what people did, and it's a sort of extraordinary thing. The reason they felt, I think, in the main, why that they could do that was because they didn't want their dogs to go out on the streets and have a horrible time and have to fend for themselves. So they just saw that as sort of the most decent and least cruel thing to do. But yeah, it's a really sort of extraordinary thing. And there were some pictures of dogs kind of piled up outside outside vets and outside kind of shelters. It's something that, fortunately, we haven't had to do. Again, obviously, as we know, the experience with COVID was the polar opposite. That we couldn't get enough of dogs. That was the time to train a dog. That was the time you gave in to your kid who was demanding a dog because they were going to be at home. And so, it was perfect time for the family to bring up a dog together. Also, it was a perfect time when you realize, I can't stand my kid asking me anymore for a dog, so we have to give in. And it made perfect sense as a companion if you lived alone during COVID as well. Often it was the only way, in the early days. I mean, sometimes it seems like ancient history, but, that idea of like only being able to go out for absolutely sort of essential things, we get a few minutes walk a day and everything else. If you had a dog, you were the most popular person in the street because everyone wanted to take your dog out. That was a perfect, reason to be out. So anyway, all of that. So yeah, I mean, that I think that should have, and I read an extraordinary figure, which again, I mean, talking about figures that are hard to believe, another figure was that the numbers of domestic dogs went up from an average of about 8.5 to 9 million over the past few years to between 20. And then during peak COVID, that peak COVID year, I suppose, to about 12.5 million, which is extraordinary. So all the shelters were initially cleared. Unfortunately, as we know, a lot of, and I know, this the chat we're having is sponsored by a shelter, is that, and they will know this better than anyone, is that a lot of the dogs then went back, of course, because people felt that they couldn't actually look after them and they didn't quite know what to do. But a huge amount of, dog breeders did very well out of it. There weren't any dogs left. Some very shady practices, happy farms and dogs coming in on trucks from Eastern Europe and being treated awfully as well. And possibly, although I don't have evidence of this, but it was suggested dogs were just breeding more as well. It was just, because of demand. So anyway, extraordinary things. So we have a lot more. We have a lot more dogs now. Pet shop suppliers did very well. Dog food people did very, very well as well.
Well, yeah, someone's actually asked a question on this subject. Jackie, who says, during lockdown, when dogs were adopted so readily, many people are now abandoning their canines. How do we deal with the fact that the reality of having a dog proves too much for many who take them on?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question, really. I mean, I'm not a vet, and I'm not I don't obviously have I don't work in a dog shelter, so I'm not professionally qualified, obviously, to answer that. I am aware that the dog shelters are, by and large, sort of, taking in a lot of dogs. I think it's, in a way, it's very hard, but I think it's sort of our failing, maybe as, fellow owners, that we didn't explain to other people, maybe who wanted a dog, how much work is actually involved. And they were seen as sort of, acquisitions where people didn't think long term as well. So there was this kind of feeling that, you want something without fully realizing that this is, terrible cliche, but dogs not just for Christmas. And it's very true. People didn't know that dogs barked and that they would, if you didn't take them out, they would be in the house. And you hear kind of ridiculous stories of ignorance, really. I mean, it's sort of, in the book, I sort of veer towards this thing of, well, how smart are we being? Dogs seem to be getting smarter in the terms of what they can do to help us in terms of healing and therapy and detection with their nose. It's an extraordinary tool. But are we getting smarter in the way we treat dogs? And it is really about education. I mean, there's no question that vets and shelters and a huge amount of other dog organizations do a huge amount of good work. But I think in this case with COVID, what happened was that that kind of human need to fulfill our desires, our instant desires, without fully thinking of the effects, actually took hold, and it is a it's a tragedy for dogs. One just hopes that there are enough responsible dog owners out there who will want a new dog. And I'm very much, I didn't really talk, I didn't want to get too forceful in the book. I didn't, in terms of my political kind of views about things, but because there's a real danger if you own a purebred lab, that you're going to sound very hypocritical when you recommend getting a shelter dog. But there's no question now that if and when we get another dog, my kids are grown up now, but it'll be just us two now, with a new dog that will definitely get a rescue dog of some sort, either from a neighbor who can't cope anymore, or doesn't want it, or whatever, or from a shelter, and that's definitely the way to go. That's also one way of ensuring you don't spend quite so much, money on a purebred dog, or a trendy dog, or any of those things.
I'm just wary of the time. Just to move away from dogs for a moment. I mentioned in the introduction that your book on the AIDS crisis is being republished soon. How did that come about? Yeah,
it's interesting. So I wrote this book, which I'm looking to see if I have a copy. Here we go. This is the original copy, not the new one. It's called The End of Innocence, and it came out in, I will tell you, 1994. So we were still in the thick of it in terms of HIV infections. It was just on the cusp of when the new drugs were coming in, and it was an extraordinary tale. I mean, a tale of initially terrible homophobia, incredible uncaring, and then very, very slowly, as a country, we began to do something good, which was education and treatment and funding, and then that came in, and then obviously all the science all over the world benefited everyone. So it's a tale of that. It's a tale of politics and health, but essentially it's a kind of a human tale. So I talked to a huge amount of people who were affected by it, either because they were unwell, or they were doctors or politicians or activists and healthcare workers and charity workers and the whole gang. And really fascinating. And this was when I was working at the Independent, and I took about a year off or so to write the book. And then things changed in terms of things improved, and the picture changed, and thank God. And the book fell out of print. And if I was to I'm trying to think of the word. If I was to update the book, I would have to write a whole other book. So it just fell out of print, and I thought that was a shame. Who gets second-hand copies? And then there weren't any second-hand copies, and there was a reason for that, and that was It's a Sin. The Russell T Davies incredible series on Channel 4, which I kind of thought, how good is this going to be when I first began to watch it? Am I going to learn anything? Am I going to be moved? Because I kind of thought I knew the story, but it is an extraordinary show. And if people watching this haven't seen it, I think it's probably still on Channel 4 catch up, and it's a fantastic series. It just humanizes things in a way where you just care for every character involved. And it's basically set at the time of my book. So this is before the drugs and everything else. And Russell used my book and was very, very generous in acknowledging that. And there were a couple of little references he talks about where he actually used things that were in the book, and he wanted to reference the book and put them in the show, which is great, including a song and various other things. And so the book is issued by Faber, and they kind of said, oh, we've been planning to re-release this for a while, which may have well been true, but obviously the minute It's a Sin came out, they said, we've got to put this out now again. So Russell T Davies very kindly wrote this incredibly generous introduction to the new edition, which comes out on December the 1st, and has a really impactful carve, a real kind of 80s, but a real blast of colour on there. I've written quite a long sort of epilogue to it. And there we are. And so it's going to be out. It'll probably get more attention now thanks to It's a Sin than it did originally. And I'm really happy that it's kind of out, it's out there. And I'm kind of, looking forward to kind of talking about it then. It's coming out on World AIDS Day, that said December the 1st. It also happens to be December will be the 40th anniversary of the first AIDS case in the UK, or reported AIDS case in the UK. So there'll be a lot happening around there.
Wow. So is that what's occupying your time at the moment, or are you?
No, so I'm in the middle of a new book, which is, again, I mean, you couldn't get further from dogs, really. But it's a book about the history of encyclopedias, which obviously ends with Wikipedia, begins sort of with the ancient Greeks, but actually really begins in the 18th century. And the 18th and 19th century were incredible boom years for encyclopedias, this sort of attempt to gather all the knowledge in the world, and that's the subheading of the book, and or maybe the title of the book. I don't know yet. So it's really interesting. So I've been spending quite a few months doing that, and that's next year, at the end of next year, like in a year, I guess. And a really fascinating kind of tale. It's basically about it's about these huge encyclopedias that you can now buy on eBay, unfortunately, for £1. These huge sets of Encyclopedia Britannica, because we have Wikipedia, and old encyclopedias are, people think they're taking up way too much space, but actually they are incredible ways of cataloguing how we thought of the world at the time and what we knew about the world in 1900 or 1930 or 1950, whatever. So they're really, they're interesting as material objects, and they're interesting as obviously what they tell us. And you have those wonderful little things about Encyclopedia Britannica talking about Hitler in 1933, saying, yeah, he's a bit anti-Semitic, but basically he's a really smart guy, those kind of things. So it's fascinating.
Oh, great. Well, look forward to that. Just before we finish, I've got a rather nice question from Jacob. What is your opinion of cats?
Okay, well,
unless he's referring to the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical, I don't know.
No, I wish I had a clever answer beyond the fact that I'm a sort of dog person, and I've always been a dog person, and I'm not saying you can't be both, but that's kind of me, really, in the way that cat people are cat people. Having said which, I think there may be a reason for that in my past, which is that I remember as a kid, I showed you that photo of Gus, my first dog. When I was a kid in our garden, I remember losing a ball beyond a hedge and putting my hands through underneath the hedge to try and get the ball back, and being scratched like this along the length of my forearm, and it bleeding, by a cat who obviously wanted the ball and kind of thought, who is this intruder? Fair enough. And so that sort of literally scarred my relationship with cats. That's the only that's sort of the only reasoning I have why I was more dogs than cats. Having said which, I've actually become way more friendly with cats. I spent a short period of time living with someone who had a cat, and that was you know, a perfectly enjoyable experience. But it seems absurd talking about cats and dogs in such a general way. It's a bit like saying men and women. You like, you know, and I'm not talking about sexually, I'm just sort of like, it's so vast. It depends who they are, depends on the dog and depends on the cat.
Great, thank you. That's just about all we have time for. Thank you very much, Simon, for your time this afternoon.
Well, listen, I really enjoyed that. I mean, who doesn't like talking about their books, and also who doesn't like talking about dogs? So thank you very much, and obviously thank you for watching as well.
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully you'll come back in the future for your next book. Hopefully it'll be in person then. Thank you too to everyone for watching and for your questions. I'm sorry I didn't get around to more. If you've enjoyed it, then please share your experience on social media or consider leaving a donation for us. We are a voluntary charity and appreciate all the support we can get. Details of how to do this will appear on the closing slides of this event and are also available on our website and Facebook page. In fact, I think details have just appeared in the chat. If you haven't read Dodd's Best Friend yet, I think you should. And the book is out now in paperback. And if you live in Barrett, you can buy it in Greaves. If you live anywhere else, I'm sure it's available in a good bookshop.